Hey everyone, so we're going to begin now that it's 2 p.m. BST. So, hi, thanks for joining. Welcome to the third of a series of webinars where we, Artos Systems, discuss pertinent challenges across the enterprise verticals and potential solutions to these that can be best achieved through leveraging blockchain and other deep technologies. So before I begin, I just wanted to give you a brief background on myself as your host. So my name's Annika Monari, and I am a co-CEO and co-founder of Artos Systems, which is an enterprise-first blockchain platform as a service company based out of London. I started my career as a physicist, finishing a master's degree at Imperial College London and doing research at both Johns Hopkins and CERN. I came across the blockchain space in early 2016 alongside my co-founder Alan Vey, and together we immersed ourselves in the technology once we understood how significant an impact it would have in the business world. So instead of moving forward with a PhD, Alan and I started various ventures innovating in the blockchain space before we founded Artos in early 2018. And our objective there was to act as the bridge to blockchain for enterprise and empower companies to be at the forefront of innovation. Today, Artos has a variety of clients across the enterprise verticals and are looking to empower organizations to understand blockchain and other deep technologies from within, helping you build your domain expertise and internal capability with respect to emerging technologies. So in this presentation, I'm going to briefly start with an introduction to blockchain. I'll then move on to discussing the top 3 challenges that we found through our research in 2020 across 2 key verticals, and that's fast-moving consumer goods and pharmaceuticals. I'll then proceed to digging into those challenges and going through a blockchain-enabled solution in a non-technical way, along with some example use cases of real-world companies implementing this for themselves. I'll then finish off with a brief introduction to Artos and a Q&A at the end. So as I go through this presentation, if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to write them in the chat and we'll try and get to them. Okay, so what inspired us to do this webinar? Well, when we were doing our research, what we found across all of the enterprise verticals is that maintaining relevance in the digital world through the running of successful digital transformation and innovation programs is still one of the top challenges when you look at the industries holistically. The size of the digital transformation market, just to give you some information here, is around $665 billion today, and the average company across the enterprise verticals spends about 10% of their annual revenue on running these programs. So the real question one must ask is, how successful are these innovation programs? Now, I'll start by motivating this, right? New technologies such as AI, Internet of Things, blockchain, they're poised to have such a massive impact on all industries. 78% of executives say that they believe they would genuinely lose a competitive advantage if they don't implement blockchain in the next few years. But what we found when we started discussing, with prospects, with experts in the industry and doing our own research, is that these initiatives are really esoteric and they end up being quite vendor-led. So the feedback we receive is that it's unclear what problems should be solved by these new technologies. And typically vendors sort of silo themselves outside. They don't try to build knowledge within the organization. So these innovation programs often fly blind in a way. And the success criteria sits outside. There's not that much buy-in from the organizations. And certainly they don't feel like they've learned that much along the way. So what we tried to do off the back of this, right? So it's clear that, these programs haven't shown the degree of success as people would have liked. We decided to run a webinar series where we walk through the sorts of problems that blockchain and other deep tech can solve and go through solutions to these problems in a non-technical way. And this way, it's part of our mission in building that knowledge and internal expertise within your organization. So I'll start off with the core content now. And the first is going to be a really brief introduction to blockchain. I'm going to keep this high level because at the end of the webinar, we'll be giving you a free Blockchain 101 ebook that will explain more of the details and give some business use cases for you. But for now, I wanted to show you this quick video that will explain it as a high level, and then I'll try and frame it for enterprise. So here we go.
One day, a car will negotiate insurance rates directly with an insurance company using data collected by its sensors. The building where the car is parked will buy energy directly from the building next door, and the business in the building will write smart contracts that negotiate and enforce themselves. What do these solutions have in common? Blockchain. Blockchain has the potential to create entirely new markets and eventually an entirely new economy. By 2030, Gartner estimates blockchain could generate $3.1 trillion in new business value. Yet only 3% of CIOs have a live and operational blockchain for their business. And most of them are focused on efficiency. Senior business leaders interested in the technology often get stuck on one question. What exactly is blockchain? Blockchain allows participants who may not know each other to safely and directly do business. No need for a lawyer, bank, or government to mediate the deal. The blockchain confirms the identity of participants, validates the transactions, and ensures everyone plays by its rules. The wide range of assets that can be traded and the wide range of participants that can take part, including machines, creates huge commercial possibilities. Blockchain creates new opportunities by combining 5 core elements: distribution, encryption, immutability, tokenization, and decentralization to form a digital ledger. Distribution means participants are connected on a digital network. Each participant runs a computer program that confirms identities and transactions. Participants also keep a full copy of the ledger. Encryption protects data on the blockchain and records information securely and semi-anonymously. Immutability allows completed transactions to be signed, time-stamped, and sequentially added to the ledger. Records can't be changed or removed. Tokenization allows participants to exchange value. Tokens can represent almost any asset, from units of data to real estate. Decentralization means that no single authority controls a majority of nodes, and decisions are made by consensus. Real blockchains require all 5 elements to realize their full potential, though early examples are.
Okay, so that gives quite a nice overview, I think. Now moving back to the core webinar content here. So one of the ways we started explaining blockchain to the enterprise community, which seems to have had success so far, is by talking about ERP or enterprise resource planning systems. So, the similarity is the way that ERP systems brought efficiency, oversight, and control to a single business's operational processes and, collaboration across departments, master data, etc. We expect blockchain will do the same thing to inter-business collaboration, right? And that's quite powerful because it takes the trust, just as that video was talking about, out of the intermediary and lets people do business together in a trustful and streamlined way. Now, I thought it was also pertinent to sort of help you understand the kinds of problems that blockchains are really good at solving, right? Because the only way to look at your own pain points and processes and understand if there's a fit there is by being able to assess that for yourself. So at Artos, we've kind of put together 3 questions. And if either of them are sort of answered with a yes, it's very likely that blockchain will be the best technology you can use to come up with a solution here. So the first one is, are there multiple stakeholders in this process or value chain that's being considered? Are there many parties interacting with each other? Is there a large network of actors? And the reason why this is a key question is the blockchain is particularly good at providing a single source of truth to all of these parties about process, about data, and it's immutable and it's tamper-proof, right? And that's quite powerful when you're talking about supply chains and when you're talking about disparate stakeholders that don't necessarily trust each other. The second question is there some kind of predictable manual process that lends itself well to automation? And the reason why that's important is because blockchain has different attributes like smart contracts, and what it's really able to do well is start to track and automate different parts of very manual processes. So for example, whether it's, any kind of action points off the back of an escrow agreement, enforcing legal contracts, onboarding clients or partners faster, the blockchain's really good at that and can streamline efficiencies there. And then the third and final question is there a requirement for some kind of data reconciliation? So, do you have a role played by one party or a limited number of parties where you're collecting data that has many different standards and you're having to reconcile it? If this is the case, the blockchain itself is able to do that task, and obviously, therefore, at a very low cost, eliminating those manual processes. So I hope that that kind of explains to you a bit about the problems blockchain is good at solving. I'm now going to move into talking about the enterprise verticals, starting off with FMCG and covering, the top challenges there that we've identified for 2020 based on our own research and conversations, based on research from Deloitte, BIS, etc. We'll then move on to digging into the root causes of these challenges. And then I'll walk you through a blockchain-enabled sort of supply chain and product traceability solution that should be able to tackle all of these challenges. And finally, we'll talk about some example use cases and implementations of this solution, namely with Walmart and Coca-Cola and their case studies. So starting with challenge number one, what we're talking about here is successful innovation and leveraging technology for better data-driven decision-making. Now, we all know that analyzing disparate data from a variety of sources is very complex and an overwhelming task for manufacturers and retailers. It's really crucial that they keep up to speed with new technology trends that can help facilitate this better. Things like AI can produce actionable insight. Things like blockchain can help collect, standardize, and reconcile data. And when you look at FMCG as an enterprise vertical compared with others, it's generally slightly slow moving with respect to these new technology trends. And so, it's really important that they start looking at new technology to master this data, to achieve a better understanding of consumers, better inventory and supply chain management, and more efficient growth operations. The second sort of challenge that we've found has to do with this new trend of consumer bonding scores, right? And what we found is proving sustainability standards and assuring product quality and authenticity to consumers is an ongoing concern. I'll be able to highlight that with some stats later. But what we found is organizations that can demonstrate sustainability and ethical material sourcing across their full ecosystem will benefit from those stronger consumer bonding scores, which has been proven now to actually affect the bottom line. But again, tying into that first challenge, right? That lack of visibility over processes, that opaqueness associated with supply chains, and that lack of mastering of all of this different data. This means that it's very costly to give this benefit to consumers because all of this data must be reconciled and collected for the company's internals first, right? Then talking about product quality, we know that this has both short-term and long-term implications on cost and revenue. And it's important now more than ever to find a solution that explores those causes for degraded quality. We need to be able to analyze the production line, manufacturing processes, quality assurance processes associated with product development. We need to be able to discern patterns and predict failure quickly, right? And identify components for repair and maintenance, in advance, so that we're not having to halt all production if certain product units end up having problems and losing a load of money there. The third challenge is around efficient supply chain management. And of course, this is always going to be a challenge, but I thought, it was worth touching on based on all of the new technologies available to help add value here. What we talk about is, uncovering and identifying cost reduction opportunities, performing accurate demand forecasting, delving deep into high impact issues. This is all an ongoing concern in the interest of keeping a supply chain running seamlessly. We need to facilitate that real-time knowledge transfer, allowing for a full holistic view of operations to be able to drive new ways of getting more efficiencies out of there. And the other thing to mention here is inventory management optimization, right? This is critical to success in the sector, and it's hindered by problems associated with supply chain management, right? Without being able to look at distribution holistically, look at all the fulfillment orders, required, and being able to reroute distribution, to handle and maximize revenue, that's an ongoing concern, and that's something that technology can really help with. So blockchain is going to make an impact, right? It's already starting to make waves in FMCG as a key part of alleviating the challenges I spoke about before. This is evidence from the following results. 42% of executives in the space plan a minimum of $5 million in investment in blockchain in 2020. 29% of enterprises in the space have already implemented it in some shape or form. And then motivating that second challenge, 73% of brands and manufacturers want to ensure the ethical and environmental certifications of suppliers. So we have motivation that there's something here that we can do. And before we dig into a solution, we have to understand the root causes of those challenges. And we've identified two core ones. The first one is there's an inherent difficulty because of that lack of data in mapping the origin of product and packaging processes through to distributor and retail activity, leading to a lack of end-to-end visibility over one supply chain. The second thing is there are high costs associated with collecting and reconciling data across the supply chain, especially data associated with the origin and transport of basic materials, right? These are the two core problems that are creating the challenges I spoke about before. And the results of these core problems, without them being solved, are pretty detrimental. So the first one is suboptimal inventory management. So we're talking about artificial shortages, fulfillment problems, etc. The second is incomplete data over retail and customer activity, resulting in under-optimized distribution. The third is an inability to make data-driven decisions over operational processes to drive down supply chain costs. And again, that's because of that lack of visibility. Then we also have high costs associated with product recalls, where, as I mentioned before, you're having to halt all production rather than be able to identify and pinpoint an issue that affected a subset of units. And finally, we have high costs associated with proving those sustainability standards, product authenticity and origins, etc., to our customers. So here's what the solution looks like, when you start analyzing those problems. We saw here on the left, right? And the example that we're going to use here is a bottle of some kind of liquid as a product, right? And what we do is we start by taking each individual product unit and digitizing it as an asset on the blockchain. And when we do that, we add attributes such as SKU, manufacture date, batch number, nutritional content, etc., to the digital asset. And then, as materials are sourced, as the product goes through its life cycle and journey and gets packaged and shipped and distributed and sold to customers, all of the data associated with that process gets reported onto that digitized asset. So as you can see here in the diagram, we're talking about typically very non-linear and complicated processes and data flows being mapped in a very linear and easy to understand way. And you can see here how data gets added at each point in the life cycle. And then what you can do, you can connect dashboards and mobile apps and things like this to a system and give authorized participants that full traceability and visibility over the end-to-end supply chain so they can make holistic decisions. The other thing you can then do, as you can see here on the right, with respect to the end consumer, is you can add a QR code to the end packaged product and potentially give the consumer visibility into some of these parts of the process, right? You can show them the origin of some of the materials. You can show them where the nutritional content originates from, that it was stored correctly, etc. Again, so that you can provide them that authenticity at a low cost. So the benefits are pretty simple here, right? Tying all the way back to the challenges. First of all, downstream issues can be identified and resolved with very low cost, since the exact point at which some kind of fault in process occurred, whether it was in packaging, whether it was in storage during the logistics process, you will be able to pinpoint that exact fault, and therefore you don't need to halt production to identify the problem. You're literally able to map individual product units on the blockchain all the way back to that fault and recall only those specific subsets of products. So that's obviously a huge cost saving. The second benefit is giving consumers visibility into those sustainability standards and product origins at a low cost, right? Once you have this traceability system in place across your ecosystem, it doesn't cost very much to just add a new lens that the consumer can use. And one of the benefits there as well is you can collect more data from consumers. When they start scanning these QR codes, you're able to acquire whatever data you want from them, and therefore get even more data to start optimizing that sale and marketing activity. Then one of the other benefits is the ability to look at inventory management holistically, identify artificial shortages or fulfillment issues, and then reroute distribution. If necessary, allow a certain supplier to kind of take over on that fulfillment order, etc. Finally, operational processes across the supply chain can be looked at holistically and optimized based on real-time data. So again, it ties into that third challenge that we were talking about. So I hope, that solution was clear. I'll try and bring it to life a little bit more by using two examples, each of different sides of the sort of supply chain. So, okay. So Walmart's our first example, right? And the use of blockchain tech in Walmart was developed out of a bad batch of lettuce, believe it or not, right? And what happened there was during a 2-year trial, a large number of customers got ill from a bad batch of lettuce. And so what Walmart did is they implemented a traceability solution into their supply chain and into their material sourcing so that they could identify this. And rather than having to halt production and incur all those costs, they were able to pinpoint exactly what product was affected at which point in the process and therefore deal with this. The other thing they wanted to do was give consumers more visibility into that product authenticity. So you can see here on the right, if we're talking about like a frozen product, it has different components like cream or chocolate, they were able to give that visibility to the end consumer on where all of these materials originated from. And the statistics are pretty impressive, right? Before the blockchain, tracing a piece of lettuce was taking them around 7 days to compile all that data, reconcile it, show it in a nice way, and then analyze it. After the blockchain, it was about 2.2 seconds. So you can see how much operational efficiency was gained there. Now that's on the upstream side of the supply chain. Coca-Cola also has a really nice example where they tried to implement a traceability solution for the other side of the supply chain with respect to inventory and distribution optimization. The blockchain project Coke did was promised to improve distribution for all participants, as manufacturers could basically access this blockchain system containing everyone's kind of orders and capabilities and requirements. And so they piloted the solution with about 12 suppliers and thousands of orders in North America. And what they were able to do is, if a bottle maker, for example, was short of stock for a looming order, the network was able to adapt quite quickly and give options for fulfilling that shortfall by, rerouting inventory and things like that. So again, you can kind of see in this bottom diagram here, how they were able to map that entire process and therefore maximize revenue through dealing with these shortages in close to real time. So that covers what I wanted to talk about within the FMCG sector. I'll now move on to pharmaceuticals, talking about the top challenges there. Again, moving to a blockchain-enabled supply chain traceability solution and a data sharing solution. And then we'll talk about two examples, Pfizer and a bit of a hot topic, a data hub project for coronavirus. Okay, so the first challenge that we're going to talk about is patient-centric healthcare. So there is a paradigm shift, as I'm sure you all know, where with new technology trends, consumers are starting to take a much more active role in their treatment plan that's prescribed by a doctor. So these patients are more informed, they wear biometric devices, they use telemedicine, they use online resource, and they know what's going on. And there are two things that come out of this, right? The first one is there needs to be a building of trust with the public again. Traditionally, partnerships were focused with the medical community. Now, people need to start building direct consumer relationships and empowering the consumer to understand what's being provided to them. And a lot of that is going to hinge on the ability to build trust, to show the safety of the drug, to show data to back up claims. And ultimately, the second point is drive prices a bit lower and engage in more value-centric pricing strategies. There's legislation across the US and other places that are pushing for pharmaceutical companies to lower prices, and a large portion of that is also driven by consumers who want to know that they're getting what's on the tin and that it's at the right price. The second challenge is around R&D. So I touched briefly before on, the growth constraints on the pharma industry as a whole. That's driven by these lower prices, right? This pushing down of prices. And one of the ways to combat this is by getting new drugs into the market, faster R&D output. But unfortunately, new drug output has been pretty consistent for the last 10 years. And assuming that processes stay identical, there's no magic reason why productivity should just increase, right? So costs need to be driven down for putting out these new drugs. There needs to be more investment into the space. There needs to be less overhead expenses, and clinical trials just need to move much faster. The third challenge is around counterfeit drugs and global quality control. And again, it ties into that first challenge around that patient-centric sort of healthcare, right? What we're talking about here is, PwC did a study in 2015, and they found that 10% of the global drug supply was actually counterfeit, right? It's huge. And especially as manufacturers move more operations overseas, and, regulations starting to force these companies to actually engage and help prevent this counterfeiting behavior. Companies are going to have to work really hard to ensure quality standards, adhere to local regulations, and help block illegal trafficking of counterfeits. And, again, they have to provide that safety authenticity to customers to tie into that first point, right? And that's the kind of crux of this challenge and how we mitigate this going forward. So again, just motivating blockchain within pharma, which I would say is significantly more developed than in the FMCG sector. So, it's already starting to make waves for alleviating the challenges I spoke about before. The blockchain pharmaceutical market is going to be about 5.6 billion in the next 5 years. 40% of healthcare execs have blockchain in their top 5 priorities for 2020. And again, motivating that third sort of challenge, 10% of global drugs are counterfeit, and this needs to be fought today. So let's dig into the root causes of these challenges again. And, there are two separate ones because there are two kind of separate solutions that we're talking about here. So the first one is a lack of end-to-end supply chain traceability, especially with respect to material sourcing, tracking the active ingredient, tracking storage processes, tracking manufacturing processes, and ultimately matching patient data to individual manufactured drug units. Without this traceability, you get some consequences. The first is manufacturers lack visibility over patient and end customer data and feedback. So they can't get that feedback loop to R&D to drive new initiatives, and they can't get that feedback loop back to operations to optimize those price to value ratios to start tackling that first challenge I talked about. Another problem is that customers and regulators are unable to validate active ingredients, safety procedures, how the drug was stored over time, and ultimately get that quality assurance across the supply chain. And, again, that contributes to that lack of trust that's sitting under that first challenge. Finally, this lack of end-to-end visibility creates opportunities for counterfeiters to enter the market without accountability. Right? There's no way to discern where they're entering, at what part of the process did they somehow, find a back door, because we don't have that visibility. Now, the second kind of root cause is around data sharing. And what we found here is that there's a general lack of standardized digital and secure data storage and sharing protocols, especially in the context of clinical trials and R&D. Where you have multiple stakeholders, multiple data sources and multiple patient groups. And this, first of all, creates a lack of trust over data. People don't trust where different data sources are coming from, that it's been audited, that it's been validated, and you therefore get these costly and time-intensive processes associated with validating, reconciling, and exchanging the data, which ultimately slows down clinical trials and increases R&D costs. So it ties into those, that second and third problem. The second sort of consequence is tracking patient satisfaction, tracking patient results and stuff is quite delayed, right? They go for checkups every so often. And there's all these manual processes then of collecting all of this data, leading to inefficiencies associated with if there's any kind of patient recalls that are required. And it also delays hitting milestones in clinical trials, which again ties back to funding and ties back to speeding up R&D. So there are two solutions, like I explained before. The bottom one you can see is that supply chain traceability solution. And the top one is the solution associated with more efficient data sharing in clinical trials. So let's start with the bottom one, right? And what we're talking about here is creating a blockchain-based tracking system that traces drugs all the way from manufacturing to distribution and retail. Every checkpoint across the process, whether it's at the raw material stage, at the logistics, at the wholesaler, every checkpoint is recorded and traced either via barcode scans, data input, biometric measures, or sensor technology. As the drug moves from creation to patient, the whole drug journey becomes seamless, accurate, audited, and secure. You'd be able to see from the ingredients supplier product codes, all the way through to the pharmacies dispensing the prescriptions to patients, how the product is stored along the way. We can even map on temperature and humidity recordings, right? And authorized viewers would get full oversight over the entire drug life cycle. So what are the benefits there, right? We get, first of all, reduced complexity for better optimization. Manufacturers and suppliers getting full visibility into that end customer for that price to value optimization. They get viable data to drive R&D initiatives. Regulators and companies can then also start to monitor the rate of counterfeit drugs, and they can see where in the supply chain they're entering, right? Because all of these codes are scanned along the way, you'll be able to know exactly where the opportunities are rising for these malicious attacks. The next thing is around reduced errors and increased transparency. So doctors, patients, and regulators can now gain confidence in quality assurance processes. They'll be able to see whether there's sufficient active ingredient in a given drug unit, whether it was packaged correctly, what are the materials and how is it stored, so that authenticity can be ensured, patient harm is reduced, and again, tying into that first challenge, we're restoring that public trust. Finally, we get better inventory control. And it ties into that Coca-Cola use case when I was talking about FMCG, right? We'll be able to have information systems that hold expiry date details, which will improve stock control. We'll be able to reroute distribution if there are any artificial shortages. We'll get that holistic visibility so we can make decisions like this to maximize revenue. So the second solution is the one on the top, which I'll go through now. In conjunction with this tracking system, we can leverage blockchain to collect, standardize, reconcile, and create auditable clinical trial and R&D data in close to real time. And we can give authorized participants, whether it's collaborating companies, whether it's consumers, whether it's other companies working on the trial or investing in the R&D, we can give them access to that data in real time, and we can be clever about what data is shown to them, right? We leverage cryptography to encrypt certain data and hold it in certain places that only certain participants have access to. And the other thing we can do is we can get patients to upload their data directly to the system. They can upload their medical records, they can attach their biomedical devices and all kinds of things like that, so we can take readings automatically. So the benefits you get here are, better trust over data. So no one can manipulate this data. All access and modification history is recorded. So we're able to ensure higher data quality. We're able to reduce auditing costs because the whole audit history is just there. And we can create new governance models over data where maybe a few people need to sign off on it before it's sworn in. Then with that more efficient way of collecting data from patients, we should also be able to expedite clinical trial results, right? Not only from this increased standard in data and getting rid of all those manual processes associated with making sure it's quality, but also with respect to collecting all that data from patients, right? We should be able to hit milestones faster. We should be able to drive down, R&D costs and expedite clinical trials. And then the final thing, just so you know, is R&D stakeholders with a system like this, they can get visibility into data that will inform them of the investment opportunity. Today, companies have to keep it very secret because, managing permissions around that data, managing the IP is quite complicated. But with a system like this, there's a much more secure way to share it with investors and therefore hopefully increase that investment pool, drive new R&D initiatives. So moving on to some real world examples, which I hope will color this in a little bit. Pfizer is working with a multiple stakeholder group to develop a blockchain-based platform for that manufacturing supply chain traceability. They just completed a proof of concept, and their goal is to provide a fully interoperable, transparent, and auditable platform to track drugs from the point of manufacture to patient. And what they want to do with this is, hopefully start to identify the opportunities for counterfeit drugs and prevent them, and then provide increased trust to patients over the safety of drugs. The next example I'll give is very topical. It's about coronavirus. So, one thing that was happening at the beginning of the virus is there were all these different data sources. They all had different results. People were calculating different values in different ways. And so, all of the researchers, the officials, everyone working on preventative measures for the virus were struggling a little bit because this data wasn't reconciled properly and it wasn't really clear. Its authenticity wasn't clear. Its quality wasn't that clear either. So the World Health Organization, Microsoft, and IBM worked together to develop this blockchain-powered data hub called MiPasa. And the objective here was to combat the virus by pulling in all the different data sources and providing an accurate, auditable record of this data to healthcare companies working on preventative measures. They also hope to be able to provide healthcare officials and the general public with more information about virus hotspots, again, to combat the virus. And I think this example is quite nice because, of course, it's topical, but it shows the power of blockchain as a means to streamline sort of data sharing. And yeah, the project is still in its early days, but I look forward to seeing what they'll be able to do. And that brings us really nicely on to a really brief introduction to what we do at Artos. And our main ethos here is we bridge companies to asset digitalization and deep technologies such as blockchain. We work with use cases like the ones I described, and we work with companies to translate those use cases into the blockchain realm. And like I touched on at the beginning of the presentation, our goal is to empower you as an enterprise to be at the forefront of innovation. We have a client-led approach. We don't want you to be disrupted by all of these emerging startups. We want to build that blockchain expertise and internal capability in your organization. And the way we do that is we start off working with you, finding a high value use case, and then translating that into the blockchain realm and showing you how to do that so you understand. You drive the process, you define the success criteria. And then what we do once you have some of that knowledge is we further train you, we give you more tools, and we give you our core platform so that you guys can roll out new use cases on our platform with our support, but without requiring any technical know-how. So I won't spend too long here because it gets quite into the nitty-gritty of blockchain tech and why it's all different. But really, why Artos? Well, we have some market-leading technology that combines the best of blockchain networks. So our Artos platform as a service takes the benefits of scalability and data privacy from permissioned or private blockchains like IBM, and it takes the kind of fraud resistance and independence, that decentralized control, that lack of intermediary from the public blockchain realm like Ethereum, and combines it into one easy to use platform without the shortcomings of either paradigm. Now, the way our platform works is we essentially take your business processes, your network activity, whether it's supply chain, vendors, what have you, your data, documents, and legal contracts, and your assets and physical inventory. And we map that into our single digital realm. And the reason why we do this is we can bring you some of the benefits listed here on the right. So we can help you enforce and execute legal contracts automatically to drive new efficiencies. We can make your physical inventory, whether it's an asset like gold or whether it's a contract, make them traceable through their life cycle so you can see that full journey, just as we touched on with the pharmaceutical solution and the FMCG solution. We can streamline document sharing and make it more secure and tamper-proof so that people can't manipulate it after the fact, and it's completely auditable for compliance. We can take your business processes and automate them and make them completely traceable so that you can drive efficiency through lower costs by eliminating manual processes. And finally, we take your data and we make sure it's reconciled, auditable, and standardized. So we're able to ingest data from your different ecosystems or get people to input it themselves, and we're able to analyze it, reconcile it, and show it to you in a really nice and cost-effective way. So this kind of showcases our platform macroscopically. And the point really I wanted to make is these two bottom layers showcase our platform, right? And our platform is fundamentally vertical and language agnostic. So we can work with any business in any vertical and bring them benefits such as, business intelligence, supply chain management, asset traceability, risk management, etc. Right? Just as I explained before. And the reason why we're good to work with within the blockchain realm is because we are quite agile. We have this really scalable way of working with you as a business in any vertical and allowing you to leverage this core platform. So all we do is we leverage our semantic gateway, which sits about here, and we translate your business and vertical specific language and process into our core platform language. And that's how we can get you working with so many different use cases so quickly. Now, the way we work with clients is kind of touching on what I said. We start by analyzing your current constraints, trying to identify a high value use case that has a blockchain fit. Then we work with you to translate that use case into our core platform language. And we help build your domain expertise in blockchain. We help you understand everything as we move along the way. Then we pilot the solution with some success criteria in a live environment. And then finally, this is where the fun begins. We give you the tools and training, and we give you our platform so that you can roll out new use cases on your own. And even the least technical people in your organization should be able to do this with our platform. And all along the way, you'll have a dedicated account manager to support you and pull in anyone necessary to help build and empower you to be at the forefront of this. So thank you so much for listening. I'm really happy to say that we'll be giving out a free 30-minute consultation to anyone that joined the webinar today. So you can book that in via an email. And as I described before, we'll be giving out a free Blockchain 101 ebook. So I'm ready to answer some questions. Thank you so much for your time. Okay, so the first question was, what does enterprise verticals mean? So, typically when we talk about enterprise verticals, we're talking mainly about commodities. So whether that's precious metals, oil and gas, agricultures, chemicals. We're talking about fast-moving consumer goods. We're talking about pharmaceuticals and chemicals and things like this, and then even potentially like retail, logistics, freight, distribution. So any kind of big companies that operate in a specific vertical, that's really what we're talking about. The second question is there any webinar certification available? I'm not sure what that means. If you can clarify that, that would help. Next question, when looking at blockchain for traceability, are vendors automating data collection, e.g. the lettuce storage temperature to ensure against bacterial growth or drug temp during shipping? Good question. Yeah, I mean, typically the suppliers that we've worked with, they use a combination of manual data input, which is obviously the fastest way to get going, but then also automatic data input. So, we've worked with like IoT devices where we're actually pulling that sensor data. Maybe we're pulling directly from an ERP system. So, it's one of those two options or a combination of either. And in an ideal world, you do want to move to the automatic ingestion of the data because, it doesn't require any kind of manual input, but obviously the manual input still adds value. Okay, follow-on question. If yes, are the costs of automating data collection included in the ROI calculations? So yes, they are. And, it really just depends on the use case. I mean, typically what we've found is that, if we're collecting data manually, so if people are using dashboards and inputting that data manually, there's obviously a delta between the cost saving associated with that paradigm and associated with ingesting the data automatically. But still, what we found is the cost saving, even when you're talking about manual data collection, is still quite high. So it hasn't really affected ROI calculations. It's never stopped a client from engaging with us on this basis because of how much ROI is still to be gained from a more rudimental approach. Okay, another question was, do you have any demos? Yes, we do. You can schedule one for your free consultation. We've worked with companies in precious metals, we've worked in payments, we've worked in tickets, and we've worked in retail. So, we can show you a variety of demos. Another question is, why Artos and not another blockchain player in the industry? Okay, so I kind of touched on that in this slide, I believe. But I would say for two factors, right? The first one is our client-led approach, where we're trying to empower you as a business to build that domain expertise. If you think about a business using like Web 2 technologies like databases, they don't outsource an SQL database to a vendor, right? They have that capability internally. And so we know the future is going to be that. So we, compared to other people, we strive to build that domain expertise today rather than waiting 5 or 10 years when the market matures. The second kind of differentiator is, again, this market leading technology. There aren't any enterprise providers that bring you the best of both worlds, permissioned and public. Typically, most providers in the blockchain space working with enterprises, they work with permissioned blockchain implementation, which, again, as you can see here on the left, that suffers from intermediaries, right? So you're working with someone that has their own incentives, they can drive up prices, they can manipulate data, etc. And you suffer from a lack of security over your data and potential for collusion and fraud, simply because there are so few participants in the network and it's controlled by 1 or 2 people, so it's not as secure. Okay, so next question was, do we need cryptocurrencies to use the platform? Good question. You do not. So what we try and do, the reason why we call ourselves enterprise first, is we give you, easy to use APIs and SDKs. We give you dashboards, we give you mobile apps, and that's how you leverage our technology. You don't need to pay in any kind of cryptocurrencies. You don't need to integrate the nitty-gritty of the blockchain. We handle that all for you underneath. So you can kind of see that right over here. So our public blockchain engine, we pay in cryptocurrencies, we handle time delays, we do all of the nitty-gritty development, and we simplify it for you up here. Another question is, how long does an integration take? Yeah, so that depends, and it ties into the person's question from before, which is, what kind of integration are you doing? Is data being collected manually? Are we having to interface with a bunch of different enterprise systems and smart meters to read this data? So depending on the use case, it can take anywhere between 2 weeks and 3 months. Another question, are you focusing on working with companies globally or in specific regions? Good question. We will work with anyone globally. Primarily, we're focused on the EMEA kind of regions just because of the proximity. But given everything going on in the world, proximity doesn't really seem to matter that much these days. So, we're happy to work with anyone. The most important criteria for us is just whether we can identify a high value use case together, and whether the client is excited about the technology and the prospect of using it. I think this is the last question so far. So who benefits from this information transparency about a product/production chain? The manufacturing company or the final end user? Good question. So the way I tried to frame those 2 use cases is that by having a system that simply brings you that traceability and that information, you're able to provide benefits to a variety of stakeholders. So of course, there are benefits to the brand and the manufacturer themselves for having that visibility. Like I said, being able to reroute inventory to maximize revenue, being able to identify fault and issues in production, and therefore have more efficient product recalls rather than having to just halt production. Obviously those are benefits for the manufacturer, the brand themselves. But then you can also give benefits to the final end customer by leveraging the system and only reporting parts of that to the end customer. So for example, with the FMCG, you can give only visibility over the origin of products, right? You can show people the different materials that go into it, and that's how you can leverage that system to give them a portion of that visibility, but without exposing too much data. So I would say anyone that benefits from having access to even a portion of this information will find it very beneficial to have a system like this in place. All right, so that covers it for the questions. Again, thank you so much for listening to me, And please be sure to book your free consultation. And if you have any questions, please send us an email or ask us on Twitter and we'll try and get to it. Thank you everyone for your time.